Before you hit the button, Jay, I just want to give everybody a chance.
All right, it's going.
All right, so I'll start the presentation. Thanks, Jay. And again, I want to thank Jay for providing the template, be gracious enough and kind enough to help me with this. Starting off with about this meetup, we are about 750 people and growing. I see new people join this meetup. Our focus is on the enterprise agile. And there are a lot of meetups out there. They do a lot of great things. What we do once a month is we have a lot of people who have experience, who are at leadership roles or advising or consulting with the leadership role. We come in and talk about experiences in terms of scaling agile at an enterprise level. And we have a lot of partners. Matrix is a huge sponsor for us, and as well as other companies as well. So just want to give a quick plug for our meetup. And thank you everybody for joining today. My background, I've been in this industry for 20 plus years. I have been working with some form of Agile for the past 15 years. I've worked with a lot of big companies, Cisco, Dell EMC, TIBCO. I had my own small startup, services startup that I grew, and then I was servicing, providing services to companies like Cisco and others. That's how my relationship with Cisco started. What I do well is that I make things happen, and in terms of delivering programs. So I am focused on delivery that connects the business strategy, that connects the tech strategy, and also the execution portions of it with the process side and the people side, and make things happen. I was born in India. I did my bachelor's in India. And then I came over to US. I have a master's in computer science, and I have a MBA as well. I've worked in US, India, and China, and I have worked with global team my entire life. And there is a bunch of pieces of paper that I have in terms of certification as well. That's my quick background. And let's start with Dilbert. I like Dilbert, and as you can see, there is I just want to move this thing out of the way so that I can see. Okay. How many of you relate to this Dilbert cartoon? It's like you have more projects, or your team, people in your team have more projects, and then you get one more thing added at the same priority level, and it's like, okay, hey, you figure out your own priority. So I feel, personally, I've gone through this. I've seen teams gone through this, and hopefully you can relate to this. The other thing that I have seen this is, hey, instead of, doing, you prioritizing all the things that you have on your plate, there is also the other scenario, which is, hey, everything is priority one or priority A, and everything else, including your personal life, is not a priority. So, that has happened as well for me personally, and I'm sure you guys can relate to that as well. And these are two, scenarios where, everything gets clogged. And if I usually do, have the saying, if everything is top priority, nothing is a top priority. So that's what happens usually with teams. So what I want to do today is I heard a lot of, expectations. So this is one of the things in terms of the introduction. People talked about what they want to see from this conversation or this presentation. What I want to do today is to share some of the lessons learned that I have experienced in the past year or so, a few months to a year. I have been part of this company. I've been helping them transform their delivery. That includes all the way from product strategy to delivering the products and supporting the products. They were in a startup mode. They started out as a small group within this big company, this multi-billion-dollar company, and then they grew quite a bit because of their focus area they were in, and the learning that they went through, and how I've been able to help them. And this is basically a journey. There is still lots to be done. So what I want to do is to make this a conversation about what we have done, what I have done with this company, and then hear some thoughts in terms of what you are doing with your organizations currently. Is this something, is there something better? Is there something that you can apply here? Things like that. So that's what I want to cover today. In terms of agenda, as I mentioned, I'm going to talk about the overview of the journey quickly. I was hired into this organization a few months ago, and they wanted me to transform the way in which they were working. So I had to lay out, okay, what are the pain points that they have currently, and what is my vision to transform the delivery of the company, of that organization. So I'll talk about that, and it's based on some of the theories and organizational theories that are out there as well. Then we'll deep dive into some of the process details I have put in place. And as I said, this is a journey. We are not done. There is still a long way to go, and I'll give some highlights in terms of, what I'm thinking, where they should be going forward. So just to give you a quick overview in terms of the journey, the company itself, I don't want to talk about specifically the name of the company or anything like that, because we are being recorded and this is a public forum. So this is a huge, company in the real estate business, and they are a multi-billion-dollar company, having like hundreds of thousands of agents, franchisees, and brokers all over U.S. and around the world. And most of the big brand names, you might have heard of it. If I mentioned that, you would know the company. And this group that I'm part of was started about 18 months ago to figure out how we can, transform this business using technology. So there was a lot of different groups that were doing different things, in piecemeal fashion. There was a lot of tech debt. There was no one technology strategy. There was the infrastructure or platform was all fragmented. The investment was always at the edges, not really focused in terms of, how do we align the enterprise strategy with the technology strategy, or vice versa. And then the talent pool was, fragmented as well. In addition to that, there was no focus from a talent pool perspective. And overall, it was more in terms of, hey, how do we support the edges, which is the agents and brokers and franchisees, rather than, hey, how do we make sure that we are positioned and we can serve our customers better from a strategy perspective, leveraging what is coming out, what we have from a technology perspective, from a platform perspective right now, and where the industry is going. So that has been the, I call it the one-year journey that we are going through. And we have made quite a big bit of strides in that. This used to be a small group of about 15 people. It started out about 18 months ago or so. Now we are about 200 plus people, and we have, most of it is here in California in the Bay Area. We have some in the East Coast, as well as some in the Midwest, and then some of the development work going on in India and Latin America. So, and before this whole crisis happened, this group was growing at around 20% year over year. We're, the last I heard, we are still growing, but hey, knock on wood, let's see how it goes. In fact, I'm still interviewing, so let's hope it stays that way. In terms of the issues that I saw when I started with this organization a few months ago, is that the first issue was about credibility. So when I rank risks in terms of delivery, the top risk is always the credibility risk. If you lose your credibility in front of your customers, in front of your stakeholders, it's extremely difficult to get it back. If you're slipping on time, or if you're, losing some people, if you're, losing some money, all of those things, all of those are risks as well, but you can make up for it. But if you lose your credibility, it's extremely difficult to make up for it. And what they have been doing over and over again was that they would commit something and change the date. Again, commit on the second time and change it, third time, etc., which ended up with extremely unhappy customers and stakeholders and frustrated management. The second thing was the amount of work that was assigned to individuals was huge. That was like they were putting in hours and hours because it was working as a startup, and that was unsustainable. There were burnout as well. People were feeling the burnout. The third thing that I saw was that the estimates that were given were basically made up. There was no release planning. There was no overall program plan. If you're, I heard some people talk about SAFe, release planning, program plan, none of those things, no formal way of coming up with a overall estimate when we can deliver and what are the mitigation, what is the governance, none of those aspects of it. Other thing, there is whiplashing. Halfway through a sprint, priorities change, people working on something, they change into something else. And that was happening quite regularly. People get together in meetings, they don't know what they achieved, another meeting that happened. And then it was all about heroes. Some people knew more, they were heroes, they were celebrated rather than celebrating the entire team and lifting up the entire team. So these are some of the things that I saw and I wanted to address in terms of how to transform this organization. And I'm sure you guys have seen something similar as well. Please stop me anytime. This is an interactive conversation. I don't want this to be a one-way presentation. All right.
Gopal, can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
Gopal, you on the two slides ago said you went from IT to engineering, IT development strategy to engineering development strategy. What constituted that change? What's that mean?
So what I meant by that is basically it went from a technology being a support to technology being an enabler. So it was more about, hey, if somebody, people have, when they go in and sell houses, there is, some systems that they need. So whatever that they need, the technology team was supporting it, whether it's in terms of laptops, whether it's in terms of some of the applications that they wanted, things like that. Instead of stepping back and thinking, hey, we can provide a platform with a certain, features, functionalities, which would help in terms of the journey of an agent, for example. And that is more an engineering focused where we develop those things, or we, get things from third party and, enhance it and provide a platform which can be used across all of the agent population in the US and around the globe that we have, reach into. So the shift was more from a technology supporting organization to a technology enabling how things are being done and how technology would solve the business problems for the customers as well as for the stakeholders here. That's what I meant. Ron, does that resonate or?
Yeah, that's really great. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about, I saw these problems. I came in, and what I wanted to do was not just put in a process in place, right? Because a process is, you might have seen other presentations in this meetup that, Jay has provided and all that in terms of the integrals. Process is just one portion of things. You got to take into account the strategy piece, the people pieces, the organizational dynamics, the cultural piece. So I was, if you guys might have heard of, Jeanne Ross from MIT. She has written a lot of papers, and she has been working on this organizational dynamic for a number of years, in fact, a few decades. And one of the big books that she has published is Enterprise Architecture as a Strategy. If you haven't seen that, I would definitely suggest, look for some clip notes, or, she has some videos on YouTube as well. You can look into that. What she talks about is that do not put together a structured strategy, because we are in a digital age. We want to design the strategy as we move along, so that the team can give input. The customers, based on how they react to things, can give input. Drive a vision in terms of where we want to get into. Do not structure strategy. And this helps in terms of, hey, we build things. If things don't work out, the cost of failure is much lower. So it helps in terms of rapid feedback and changing the strategy. So this was one of the main themes that I used in terms of, changing this organization. The other thing that I wanted to do, and I helped this organization, was there was a product strategy in terms of how we are going to build products and how we are going to drive this, help our stakeholders as well as our customers. I didn't want this product strategy and product lifecycle to be in a separate silo from how we are delivering things. It needs to be woven into the organizational process so that we can drive innovation. So this would be, you will see that when I go into more details in terms of the process, is that we added GQM, the goal question metric, as well as design thinking into the overall portfolio lifecycle. So that was one of the things that I wanted to focus on as well. This was the vision. The other thing is I wanted the teams to drive improvement on an ongoing basis instead of it being driven down, top down. You guys might have, you guys I'm sure have read Chip Heath's book in terms of the change. It's about the elephant and the elephant rider who's trying to steer the elephant. The elephant will get its way. Elephant is the team here. So if the team is going to drive improvement, we're going to get that exponential effect. And then the other thing is about making sure that the team helps each other. And this drives the osmotic learning. And finally, this was one of the big changes that has to be driven. There were a lot of anecdotal things that were going on. I had to change that into a data-driven insight in terms of decision making. So these are the 5, vision items that I wanted to drive change in this organization. So usually I approach things from top down, start with the organizational strategy, and then drive into the team rather than go and start fixing the teams one by one and try to build it into the strategy. So I started off with the overall portfolio planning, focus area, how to drive changes there, then put in release planning, which is to drive the program level items, and then look at the team and put in things to drive changes to the team and how the teams can deliver better. And then obviously from a data-driven perspective, the metrics pieces and the tools pieces. So what I want to do for the rest of the presentation is to go into each one of these areas and talk about, hey, what we did, some of the lessons learned, and I want to hear from each one of you what your thoughts are in terms of what we could have done better or, we could have done differently. So this is the overall process life cycle. So I look at this as a funnel. This kind of came out a little bit cute in this picture, So the product intake, the mouth of the funnel is huge. There is a lot of ideas that come in from different sources. And then at the end of the funnel is actually the actual product that is used by the customers and to drive difference in terms of what they do to the customer, and to help the business. So this funnel becomes narrower in each phase until we get to the actual product. So the first piece of this is the intake, which basically the focus is from the product team. And, the product team does this regularly, multiple times a week. And there is, as I mentioned, the GQM, the design thinking that goes into it. And I also put in some, industry standard scoring to figure out how we can stack rank what is coming in.
Gopal,
the second piece.
Gopal, did you say TQM?
GQM, goal question matrix. I'll go into it in a second, Ron. It's in my next slide coming up. We'll get into the details of that in a second. Please bear with me. The second thing is, obviously, once we have a list of initiatives and epics that are coming in through the mouth, how do we prioritize it? And how do we make that into a roadmap? So again, this is a high-level roadmap for the next few quarters to figure out, okay, what is that this organization is looking at to deliver for the next 3 to 5 quarters at a high level. And again, this is not a commitment, but we need to have some kind of a way to convert the input into a prioritized stack bank. Take input. We also need to infuse the NFRs, the non-functional requirements, into it, as well as we need to weave that with some of the corporate as well as executive priorities, and look at our capacity and all the changes that are going on and all the things that we are supporting, and come up with a roadmap. And that's the whole overall roadmap planning phase of this. And what I introduced there is doing this once a quarter. Once we have a roadmap for the next 3 to 5 quarters, we'll take the first quarter, and that gets more granular into a release plan. So release plan is basically what SAFe talks about from a release planning perspective. Take the epics and break it down into stories, figure out dependencies, talk about release trains, and talk about milestones, and execute them. So that's what the release planning is all about. And then once we have that for a quarter, which may be like 2 to 4 sprints, potentially maybe more, what we ended up doing was about 6 sprints, 1 quarter is the release plan. And then each one of the sprint, we go through a quick sprint planning, and then go through the delivery of the sprint, which get assembled towards the end, at the end of each release, and that gets released to the customer. Once it goes out to the customer, obviously, depending on the what the application is, there is feedback that needs to be gathered from the customer, and the feedback, either we figure out, hey, this app is not that good, this application is not that good, we put that in inactive or hold status, or we add more things, more epics into it, and stories into it, features into it, to make it into, it goes back to the front of the pipe, and we go through the prioritization, and it goes through the next release. So that's the overall process that I put in place to make this chaos into something that, some level of order, so that we focus on, delivering the strategy for based on what the business is looking for, what the products are looking for, as well as focus on the productivity, as well as the communication and innovation portion from the team perspective. So that's the overall process life cycle that I put in place. And this was a big change for the organization. I can tell you it took me almost 3 months to convince the different leadership team to actually, sign up for something like this. And there were proponents. The good news is my manager was a proponent, so it was a major sponsorship from my manager side. But, some of my peers, they were having some thoughts. Why should we do planning? I like my own, fiefdom, my empire. There was a lot of things that went on. It has to be a lot of socializing to make sure that we actually make this happen. So it is, we have gone through a couple of cycles of this. There is still a lot of improvement we have to go through, but, I can tell you it actually works, and people are actually very positive about this overall process life cycle. I just want to pause here and see if anybody has any questions or anybody want to share something here.
Yeah, so
did I hear somebody say?
Yeah, this is Jay. So one of the things, I don't know if you've experienced that yet, for some large organizations, during the product intake, before we do a roadmap, we have multiple business units with multiple, budgets and funding. But there's only one IT group that supports multiple business units. So we had to go through a process by which we worked with the leaders of each business unit, and we would have to score, like you said before, and prioritize the work because they were sharing the same IT group. But I noticed that there's a trend out there now where each business unit gets their own IT group, right? Which makes it a lot simpler, except for shared services and shared infrastructure, because those teams are generally, shared across all the business units. So I was wondering, have you run into that situation yet where you had to, deal with stakeholders and whoever screams the loudest gets what they need, right?
Yeah, definitely that is the case with the company I'm part of right now. There are multiple businesses within the company that I'm part of, and each company has its own, group that does its IT and all those things, and they want to do things their way. So a couple of things that helped in terms of this, this process. Number one, overall from the CEO down, they didn't want to have these shadow IT teams. So that definitely sets the precedence and the direction overall for everybody. Number two, from a more tactical level, what we are doing from the group perspective, we are what we do is the end-to-end data. So we ingest data from internally from a lot of different sources, as well as externally from all of the third party into a data lake, and then put together data marts and data warehouses on top of it, as well as curate the data to via MDM, provide APIs, whether it's streaming or batch APIs, as well as create an AI ML model using the data, and then create front-end applications, whether it's mobile or web applications. So we do the entire data lifecycle, including the applications, and the fragmented or shadow IT teams, they couldn't really do this at scale that we can do at an organizational level or at a corporate level. So these are two major things that worked in our favor to help them. But the whole thing about, hey, this is my budget, I'd like to do it this way. The other thing that I did was we had a product management team within our organization. And then for each one of the business units, if they are one of the stakeholders, we would recruit a strong product manager, a business product manager in that organization. So they would be the person who would drive some of these requirements and review what we are doing for their application or their portion of the features in an application. And they would become the input. And then on the other flip side, they would be, the proponents within their organization. And this product manager, business product manager, is usually appointed by, one of the top people within that business unit. So that was the third thing that we did that helped in terms of, overcoming that hurdle that you mentioned, Jay. That was a major hurdle we had to go through as well. And it's still not fully solved. We still go through it.
So were the objections primarily, I want my own silo, or were there other objections as well?
They had their own application that they have developed over the past so many years. They don't want to give it up. That was another one. So even though that application is like, a nightmare in terms of maintenance and it's not solving the problems that they are facing right now, they wanted to keep using that. So that was another objection. The third thing was, hey, do you guys really know what we are doing here? So there was a domain knowledge objection. So these are some of the big ones that we have faced, Ron.
Second question, will you talk anything about the tools you used to pull in, to both pull in and give transparency to the, you've used the word intake canvas here, but your product, everybody's got a list of things longer than their arm to do. How do you do that? And then secondly, the prioritization of that, which is, so a tool, anything from a card wall to digital tooling.
Yeah. So the tool right now, what we have done is implement Confluence. So it's like wiki pages for, the product intake and the priority, and, it keeps updating for people to come and view what is going on. So it's transparent. We didn't get into, there is a PMM tool that, that is a legacy tool that is left over from many years ago. I'm just starting to look at it to see how to leverage it. Haven't looked into that PMM tool too much because, I was focused on getting some of these shop in order quite a bit before looking at that overall PMM tool. In terms of the prioritization, I will talk about that in a second, Ron, if you can hold on for a second. But
Absolutely.
The tooling piece, I wanted to keep it simple initially. We may add the PMM tooling tools as we evolve, as we go through a few iterations of it.
And so you've got you've got a list of things in Confluence, and at any particular moment when you go look at Confluence, whatever's on top is the most important thing.
So what is happening is we go through a prioritization process and we go through a roadmap. Those things are not published to everybody, only to certain leaders within the company, and get input in terms of their overall priority to change things there. What goes into the Confluence tool is a distilled version or a summarized version of what is coming in the next couple of quarters. So it's more for a broader consumption.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. If there are no other questions, I'm just looking at time. This is good. Any other questions before I move on?
Gopal, I had one question related to your product intake, and just to get me better understanding. So when you say product intake, is that something like a MVP process that happens at that level, or like what has been the approach like?
So it has been more a manual approach. So maybe I should jump into my next slide, which goes into each one of these phases in a little bit more detail. You should talk about this. Let me go through this. So the product intake process, this should answer your question, and the next slide should answer your question, Ron, in terms of prioritization. So what the product team does. We have product managers internally. And then, as I mentioned, we have this business product manager role that we work hand in hand as well. And they go through what is called a GQM. And this is something that, was used a while ago. I think it was in the, late 70s, 80s, something like that. And then it didn't catch fire, but it kind of, people are looking at it again at this point. So this basically is like, you talk about a goal and then talk to, let's say you have, your personas based on your personas. You pick an actor on the persona, a sample of the actors. You go and talk to them about a goal, and then, with a goal in mind that, to help them in the journey map. And then you have a list of questions that most of them are powerful questions which are open-ended. And you talk to them about how they navigate their journey in real life from based on, what they're going through day in, day out. And you also talk to them about some of the measurements that they go through from a metric perspective. And what comes out of this is basically, their pain point in their own words based on their day-to-day journey. So the GQM is a framework to help understand what an actual actor is going through in their day-to-day life. So that's what we use the GQM for. And then we use the design thinking. And you guys know about the 5 phases of design thinking: the empathy phase, the define phase, the ideate phase, prototype phase, and the test phase, right? So we use the 5 phases, the design thinking, to convert the answers that are coming in from the GQM to empathize with the actor and ideate that those pain points into something which we are thinking in terms of a solution. So, and build some kind of a wireframe prototype which we can show it to the actors and get input. And based on their input, you can see, you can make a determination whether, hey, this is something that would work here or not. So that is the, product intake process that we go through with a number of different stakeholders. Whether it's and this changes because of the industry we are in. You can have an actor, let's say an agent, who is in, let's say, Nebraska. The way in which they approach and get a lead or sell a house or put things in the market is totally different than an agent in Bay Area, because the markets are totally different. So there are segments that we have to look at, even though we have, it's the same actor. There are different segments, and they go through a different journey map for them. And then it's not just the agent. You have, executives, and usually the executives are like, regional VPs or, CFO of certain businesses, brokerages, which are big brokerages, CEOs of brokerages. They have certain things that they want to look at as well. We have customers, the end customers, who are actually buying the houses or buying residences. They are another actor. They go through a journey map, and you see, Zillow and others. They're focused on customers only in terms of the actors. We look at all of the different actors and their journey map here. So that's what we do from a innovation perspective, from a product intake perspective. And hopefully, Piyush, this answers your question in terms of the product intake.
Yeah, that to an extent, yes, thanks.
Okay. And then this intake provides, creates a list of product intake documents, and, we call it PID. And each one of the PID can be an initiative, can be an epic. And that is what, we use. And this is to answer your question, Ron. Hey, we have, a list of things in terms of these PIDs that are coming out of this GQM as well as design thinking. Now, what do? We have a number of different teams in terms of, data science team, mobile team, engineering team. We, do an innovation committee with this team to brainstorm, hey, how do we, we have this Warframe, this idea, we ran it by the actual actors. Can we convert this into an actual application? Or can we convert this into a model, AI ML model, that can give them something that can answer a question that they cannot answer without, maybe going and visiting 100 people, right? So one question may be, hey, I am an agent in the zip code, right? In the zip code, any zip code in the US. Looking at my zip code, I know there are a number of houses, and these houses, some of them are going to sell. Some of the owners are getting ready to sell. I can go in, traditionally what these agents would do is go in and knock on each doors in some way, whether it's through the supermarket, whether it's through other channels, and get their name in front of these property owners so that they pick these agents. But, from an application perspective, is there any way we can build a AI ML model which can predict a potential homeowner is a high probability of selling the house in the next 3 months, for example? If we can do that based on a number of parameters, let's say there is a change in terms of their selling patterns, there is a change in terms of their buying patterns. They are looking at potential travel patterns, things like that, maybe change in terms of their household, change in terms of their income, things like that can be predicted. And if we can predict to a high degree somebody is going to sell, then the agent can spend more time with that person, and they can close this person much, the amount of closure is much higher based on this predictive model. And that is a solution that, one example of a solution that we can provide to the agent, and that would help the customer as well because they're trying to figure out what to do next, right? So that is the innovation committee. They think about, hey, some of these pain points can they, solve, right? And then these PIDs, as I mentioned, goes through what we call a RISE process. And this is the estimation process, Ron, you were talking about. It's an industry estimation process. I actually took that and customized it. So the RISE stands for reach. That means an application or an idea. How big is the reach? Is it going to reach 50 customers or 50,000 customers or more, right? What is the impact in terms of, hey, is it going to generate, $10,000 in revenue, $100,000 in revenue, or $100 million in revenue? The third piece of the RISE is the confidence. How confident are we in terms of our prediction of the R and the I, the reach and the impact? And then the final piece of this RISE is an estimate in terms of high-level estimate in terms of what would it take to get the solution implemented. So the RISE is a formula, R times I times C divided by E, and it gives a score. The higher the score, the better it is. And that is the industry prioritization standard that I took. And then I customized it with the last E at the end, which is the executive score. So let's say we have a RISE track list of things, and if our CEO looks at it and says, okay, based on my strategy, your number 10 should be number 1. So there is a adjustment that we need to make. So we actually, what I did was put together this RISE score, which is used for prioritization in terms of all of the product intake or the ideas that are coming in. So that is the next step in the process, and then it goes into the portfolio planning committee, which is the leadership team, to figure out, okay, how do we convert this into a roadmap and what we actually have to do. And obviously there are NFRs and other items, support items that we have to deal with. So those things are taken into account as well in terms of how we convert the stack rank list of ideas into a roadmap. I see a lot of chat. Is there things in the chat window coming in?
No,
I think there are 5.
I'm just sending links. So I sent a link, a Google search to the RICE thing so they can look it up. I also
okay.
I sent a link to the Weighted Shorts Job First because it's very similar to RICE. It's a little different, but not much, to be honest with you. So I just been sending the links to these some of these stuff so people can look them up.
Okay. Thank you, Jay. That is very useful. I don't know if that gets.
Gopal, who do you have sitting on your portfolio planning committee?
So that is usually it's made up of all of the engineering leaders, the product leader, myself, and my manager and my manager's manager.
And does that feel like the right group?
I had to start with that right now because we are focused on cleaning up our organization. Ideally, what I would like to do is that once we get mature, I would definitely like to invite some of the business leaders from the other business units to participate in some portion of the portfolio planning committee. I don't know, Ron, if you had other experiences with respect to the portfolio committee.
Boy, it varies. It varies in every situation. It's really, my experience is it's got to be unique and you've got to figure it out. So I was curious what you had figured out.
Yeah, I wanted this. So the thing is, we have a charter from an organization perspective, right? We have to deliver to, stay viable as well as, show value to the organization, to the corporate. So, the portfolio committee is basically, hey, this is the chain of command. We are the ones who are, accountable to deliver these, value adds to the organization. So that's where, the buck stops with us at the end of the day. And that's what I started with in terms of the portfolio committee.
Yeah, so Gopal, this is Jay. I mean, I think this underscores the importance of organization design and organizing the people. The process generally, is like you said before, is as a component, but if you don't have the organization structured in a certain way with ownership throughout the process and how it's going to be executed, it falls apart. So I like this. You kind of took time to say, okay, how am I going to organize the people to get the work done and get decisions made in a timely manner? The recommendation, which you probably already thought of, I would throw out, is somehow in this process, you've got to include technology debt. So you're always going to have technology. So that's some of your spend, that's some of your investment. So I can innovate, but 50% of my budget may have to go to keeping the lights on or tech debt fixing and that sort of thing. So that probably is part of your PIDs. I don't know if you do that.
We do. So the capacity management piece, we don't do the PID with the support activities. It's more on the new ideas as well as major enhancements. Support activities as well as, other, non-functional requirements and things like that, NFRs, those things are managed in terms of, shaving off a portion of the capacity into those buckets. That's how I have done this. But what I'm looking at is some of the non-functional requirements actually has to go through a PID because there are huge things that we have to do, which is not something we can do like 10 or 20% of the capacity. It requires a lot more than that. And that needs more visibility. So that's one of the lessons learned that I'm looking at to changing. Jay.
Gopal, one question, if I may.
Yeah.
So I really like this approach, and My only query or curiosity is like, how are you able to onboard the key stakeholders and others to be participation in this journey? Were they already doing this before to a different way, or like what was it that made them to sign up or buy into this?
As I mentioned, this organization is growing rapidly. It started out as like a 18, 20 people organization, and it's like 200, 250 people right now. In the past 18 months, it has grown to that, that is the rapid growth we are going through, and it's still growing. So when I went in, there wasn't a whole lot in there. There were some portions of it. So all of this is greenfield that I put in place. It wasn't like I have to take away some of the legacy stuff and put in some new stuff there. So that is one of the reasons why I took this role. It was a transformational role for a kind of greenfield effect. So that's exciting to me, Piyush.
Yeah. So how was their buy-in, in the sense, like what I was trying to learn is, were they open to your suggesting this experiments, and like how did they get like, I understand like it's a greenfield, but you have some level of cognitive bias when you want to have any transformation that happens. So did you face any challenges in that?
Yeah, so the pain that they were going through in terms of everything being a number one priority, and there is never an end in sight, right? It's always about, hey, you didn't deliver this. That was the pain that they were going through for a few months before I joined. So they were ready for this change because of that, number one. Number two, this also was helpful in the sense that this gave, the silos, whether it's an engineering silo here or there, this gave them visibility to the CXO level in terms of what they're delivering on a quarterly basis. And they saw that in terms of how, quickly the CXOs are coming in and looking at this and, giving positive feedback about this directly to them in terms of, oh, you guys, put in your blood, sweat, and tears and delivered this last quarter. This is awesome. Why didn't you tell me about this earlier? Right? So that was kind of the conversation. When you highlight some of the good things that they have done, and it hasn't been, socialized in a broader context, it kind of takes away the value of this. It kind of take away the value of each team. And when you increase the visibility of what people are doing, it actually shows them in a very good light. And it obviously, they were struggling with the work-life balance as well. So, this was, a clear way to solve that other issue that we had to face. So I was lucky in terms of, they were at a point where the pain was heavy. There wasn't a whole lot of visibility. It wasn't entrenched. So, in some ways it was luck. In other ways, it was also focusing on, hey, how is this going to help you and your team? That was the other thing that I focused on.
Yeah, that's great. So you bring a very good point on bringing in transparency. So what was their take on how, and what was it that you did to bring the transparency at what work is getting in the intake? Did you have to do that, or how did you go about like that?
Ask me the question another way. I didn't fully understand the question, Piyush.
Yeah, so sorry to confuse you. So what I'm trying to learn is that when you mention about transparency, what was the approach towards bringing the transparency? Like this, I can understand these are the processes. In terms of the backlog, how was the backlog management of your intake to your road mapping? Like how did you get the right people, and what did you get them to do in that?
So that's why I was talking about, I started with the strategy and understanding the strategy and, connecting the strategy with what we are doing currently or the list of things that we have and how, doing something which is a lower priority currently and showing it as a, something that we should have done earlier, right? A couple of examples to each one of what they're doing is what helped, right? So one example is, when we are talking in terms of, building AI ML models, right? The data scientists like to play and build a bunch of different models. But if the models are not converted into an application that, the agents are using or one of the actors are using, personas are using, then it's just a model that's sitting on the shelf. So when you take one of those models and build an app to it and show it to agents, and you see the feedback coming in from the agent, as an example, you see a big difference from a team perspective, how they react to it from a team perspective. From a leadership perspective, it shows, hey, this is the value that my team has developed, and that gives visibility at 2-3 levels above what the leaders are in terms of the visibility as well. So showing that and how we are delivering what we are promising, right? So that was the other thing at the CXO level, at the higher senior management, executive management level. They want to see, hey, you are delivering consistently and you're exceeding your expectation. So that was the main play that that made the difference there, Piyush.
Yeah, that's great. So probably you had some kind of a Kanban system that you established between the folks to help them understand how the flow of the intake is happening, right?
Yeah. It was not a formal system. It was more conversations with PowerPoint, Piyush. But I understand, what you're thinking in terms of the Kanban system, maybe something to think about. I'll definitely think a little bit more about that to see if we can automate that.
That's
This is Jay. So I think Piyush and others are right. The mechanics of how we do things and the ways of working is important. I think back to your point of having conversations with leadership and building relationships is the ways of thinking. The way I try to do things is a lot of times I focus first on the ways of thinking. So a lot of times, we're in there because they're failing or they're painful and stuff, and we're in there to solve the pain or release, which you've done. And you did analysis and find out, where the low-hanging fruit is and how to reorganize and so forth. But if they didn't have pain or failure, they wouldn't need any help, right? So the first thing I try to do is find out what their ways of thinking, because their ways of thinking and what they think the world looks like and how they have to interact with it and how they think through how to do not just work, but how to solve their problems and what's their passion about, and all that cool stuff is really important to you coming up with these models. So my thinking is that you came up with these models because you were able to map it to their current ways of thinking. And like you said before, it's a journey. This is the first step to their journey. Then you're going to have others and on your journey, you're going to change their way of thinking, right? So that, yeah. I think that's cool.
Yeah. Thank you, Jay.
Great point, Jay.
Yeah. I'm going to move to the next slide. Jay, how long do we have? Is it until 8 o'clock? Is that the time I have?
I was on mute. Sorry. You have until 8.
Okay. So we have about 25 minutes left. I just want to be cognizant of the time as well. All right. A great conversation. This is awesome. I love it. All right. So I just want to show this, those people who have gone through SAFe and have implemented SAFe Certified. This is nothing new. So once we have a portfolio and on a quarterly level, and again, we had sub portfolios as well, depending on, certain areas, we wanted to convert that into programs. And, the way in which we did that is using the safe release planning and using the customized, we customized this a little bit in terms of what is a program train, what is a, development train, things like that. And, I'm still working through them right now. One of the things that we are having with respect to the release planning is that we haven't decoupled some of the engineering deliverables with some of the external, commitments we are making. So I'm going through decoupling that in terms of the different trains as well. So this is the release planning. They have not done release planning. They were doing sprint planning, and they were making estimates for, a few months down the road or a few weeks down the road with a 2-week plan. So that was a big pain point that they were having. So this was a big change that I drove with them in terms of taking the list of epics that we need to do, the prioritized list of epics that are coming out of the portfolio plan, and saying, okay, now the whole team is involved in this. This is not the leadership team saying, okay, this is what the release should look like. We have, a number of Agile pods. So based on the particular portfolio, it may be like a couple of these pods, 2 or 3 pods, working together, brought them together in a, I was able to do that physically. Now we are looking at switching it into virtually using Miro board and things like that for the next quarter. But right now, what we did for the past couple of quarters was, bring them physically into a big room and do the big room planning, where there is the development team, there is the product team, there is the leadership team, and they take the epics, they break them down into stories, talk about dependencies, talk about capacities, do the planning for each one of those stories, figure out where each one of these things go from a dependency perspective, move things from one sprint to another based on the capacity that they have. And again, the capacity is shaved off for some of the support activities. And this also included stories from a NFR perspective and epics from an NFR perspective, breaking those epics into stories, figuring out some the external pieces, some of the outside teams that have to work with this team, whether it's a DevOps team that is coming outside, whether it's a data ingestion team, whether it's a data lake team. Those are outside teams that need to provide some input into this. So the external and internal dependencies, figure out risk, and then put together a confidence vote for this. And we had to get to a 4 or a 5 in terms of the confidence vote on a scale of 1 to 5. And again, this is a safe scale. 4 is 80% or higher confidence. 5 is a 90% or higher confidence. So everybody in the team has to give a 4 or a 5 to move this plan forward. So this was one of the things that I rolled out, and this actually helped in terms of getting the milestones out. That instead of just changing the milestones, this actually came up with milestones that the team signed up on. And I can tell you one of the big lessons learned is that the first release planning that we went through, the team overcommitted, and we had to, they didn't deliver as per the milestone. The second release planning was much better in terms of, the commitment, because the team understood what they could deliver, and there were also metrics in terms of, the predictability metrics from a velocity perspective, as well as from a story completion perspective. So use that, and that actually release over release, this actually is getting better in terms of getting to the milestones that we can share with the external stakeholders as well as the executives. So this is the release planning. I'm not going to go deep into this because most of you guys are, safe experts, but this is a customized version of the safe that I used for this. Questions? All right. So the other thing is, now that we have a release plan, how do we make sure that the team delivery is, we button that up? So what I used was a 2-3-5-6 model. there are 2 gates to each to the team, 3 roles for each team, 5 artifacts for each team, and 6 alignment areas for each team. So the team 2 gates, from a release perspective, we had I had to put together a definition of ready and definition of done, and the team refined it. The same thing with a sprint perspective. What is the definition of ready and definition of done? You know, all of you guys are Agile experts, so you know what DOR and DOD are, but the teams didn't have that, and this actually helped in terms of the gate. You know, when we can start a release planning, when we can start a sprint planning, and then when we say a release is done, when we say a sprint is done.
Gopal, how do your definitions of done differ between release and sprint?
So the release, so that's a very good question. You know, I can tell you the first time I did the definition of ready for the release versus the definition of ready for sprint, it's similar, but the release pieces has more of the integration testing pieces. It has got more of the end-to-end product testing pieces, things to it from a definition of done perspective for the release. From a definition of ready perspective for the release, it's more about the epic level, which has got the OKRs and making sure that the OKRs are there and things, and the epics are fully defined with the acceptance criteria for the epic. But the sprint level is more at the story level. So it's the acceptance criteria. There is no specific OKR for each story. It's more at the epic level. And one of the things that I am changing from last quarter to this quarter is that I'm introducing a feature concept between an epic and a story to make a little more granularity in terms of, an epic. The way in which I defined an epic was something that is consumed by the customer, but it can be something that is completed by the team within a quarter. A feature, so what ended up happening was there was a confusion in terms of whether we should have a feature of an application within an epic, defined as an epic or a story. So I'm trying to introduce a feature level, hierarchy between an epic and a story to make sure that the feature is a vertically sliced portion of value that the customer can consume. And there are multiple features in an epic, and an epic can be an application, or it can be an enhancement to the application, which can have one or more features to it. So the difference between the release level and the sprint level is more in terms of the packaging and the value aspects from a definition of ready and a definition of done. Ron.
And this is Jay. I can just add some stuff here. So, so generally at the release level, the definition ready, we have a list of things that we expect out of the sprint. For example, that it has the coverage, the test coverage, and so forth. We also look at defects. So we look at defect types. So how many, how many critical ones, major ones, so forth, SEV 1, SEV 2, SEV 3s. We have a list of what we accept, right? And then there's a percentage. So we have a whole list that says you have to go through all this stuff before you're ready to pull in the code for this release, end-to-end testing, penetration testing, whatever we do. The other thing for definition ready, which is coming commonplace now, and I'm sure Ron can talk to this, is feature flags. So do we have the feature flag set properly and the structure inside the code and so forth to do that? And have we done the technical readiness that's necessary on the infrastructure side to do this? And then when we look at definition of done for release, that comes to, how many SEV defects do we have? We have go, no decision, right? And turning the feature flags on or off to push to the production environment. So the environments come in here. So definition ready, meaning it has to be in a certain environment for us to prepare for release. And then we have a whole list of stuff that we've got to do. And then that ends up to be the definition of done. Then what we generally do, which we kind of new is we have now this notion that once it's in production for a while, we'll have what we call customer feedback or and so forth, and we take the data. So we have these OKRs that you were talking about, and these things that we wanted to improve the customer experience or whatever. Well, we don't know if that's been improved, so we have to wait 3 months, 6 months, or whatever it is. And then we have that kind of listed as well, so that we can get that data. Then that data comes back into your cycle again, because we now are going to prioritize something didn't work. We have to do something else, and when it comes back through. So I just want to throw that in for some color.
Yeah, that's very helpful, Jay. Ron, does that help? I do have some samples. If we can take this offline in terms of some of the things that I have done in terms of definition of ready and definition of done, and I definitely would like your input on some of those things.
And are your teams engaged in defining those definitions, or is this management that's doing it?
So the first version of it was all me. I just sat down and put this thing together. But I'm asking my Scrum Masters and Program Managers to review this and update this based on each one of the pods that they manage, or group of pods that they manage. So it's a learning process, I would say. It's not where I want it to be, Ron.
Good. I think the engagement of teams is just incredibly important in those definitions.
Yes, definitely. That translates into ownership.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And accountability.
Yeah. The other thing is about roles. So, what I saw from a team perspective was there a technical lead and, senior engineer, architect, all those things. So change that to have 3 roles, irrespective of what titles that they have from an HR perspective. So either you're a product owner, or I don't differentiate between a Scrum Master and a Program Manager role. So, people who are Scrum Masters and Program Manager, they shift hats. So my team, I ask them to do both, and they need to flex between both. And then the development team. So these are the only 3 roles in a team. Nobody is a lead, nobody is an architect. They may have those titles from an HR perspective, but these are the only 3 roles. It brought quite a bit of sanity from a team perspective in terms of, what we should do, and it actually empowered the team from a accountability perspective as well. And then the 5 artifacts. So the portfolio backlog I talked about, that came out of the portfolio planning, the release backlog that came out of the release planning, the sprint backlog that is part of the sprint grooming and planning, and then what is delivered at the end of each sprint, which is the sprint increment, and then what is delivered at each end of each release, which is the release MVP. So these are the 5 artifacts that we track from a team delivery perspective. And then alignment areas. One of the things I saw, I didn't even know, people didn't even know how many sprint pods were there. How many agile pods were there. So change these things into, either you are a Scrum team or a Kanban team. If you're a Kanban team, you have your Kanban board, you're doing support activities. But if you're a Scrum team, which is like 80-90% of all the pods, you got to have the same heartbeat. So every sprint across the whole organization starts and stops at the same time. They do the sprint planning at the same time. And then the naming convention. So it was like some people were calling it sprint 15, some people were calling it sprint 79, and there was no standard to it. So I put in like clear standard naming convention so that we know when somebody says 2020 Q1 sprint 1, what that means and when it's being executed. And then the other thing I talked about briefly is the hierarchy of how we define the requirements, how we break the requirements down the PID. Initiatives are the PID. Initiatives are broken. Initiatives are, items that are concepts that are converted, that can be converted into a solution, and that can take multiple quarters to accomplish that. Each initiative is broken down into epics, which have specific OKRs, and it's something that is consumable by the user or the customer, and it is something that can be completed in 1 quarter. Features are vertically sliced, value within an epic that the customers can consume. So one epic may have one to many features. And then each feature is broken down into user story with an acceptance criteria. And then each story can have multiple tasks depending on, people working on it. So this is the hierarchy that is defined. And then the other thing that was not done was the epic OKRs, enforcing that each epic, unless you have a specific OKR and the whole team need to know what the OKR is so that they clearly know what the value that they're delivering and how to adjust the features and stories and tasks that they're planning based on the OKR. And then the acceptance criteria for both the feature and story, it's a must-have. And then the measurement. This was like all over the place in terms of how the story point was done. So just picked one of them and said, we're going to go with this. And again, there are some things we can improve on that. I know that, but I had to make some decision there in terms of giving some guidance to the team and, reducing the chaos. So that's the alignment areas that I rolled out. And then from a metrics perspective, a couple of things. 2 focus
Gopal?
areas. Yeah.
How did you get alignment? So it's great to say 6 alignment areas, but how did you get people to actually use the same vocab? What mechanisms did you use? Did you decree this, or did you implement training, or did you get everybody into a big room and what'd you do?
Yes. So thanks, Ron, for asking that question. Very important. So what I did was, this is rolled out from a top-down fashion. And when we did, and my team did the release planning with the team, before the release planning was done, I and my team took them through the socialization as well as training of what we are going to change. So what is the release planning? Why are we doing it? What is the involvement of the team? What are the roles of the team? What is expected from the team? Things like that. So there were, sessions that we did before the release planning. And as part of that session, we also said, okay, based on this release planning, what is going to come out is we're going to have a standardized, heartbeat for each sprint, the naming convention. And then this is the hierarchy we're going to follow. And then working with the product team to make sure that the OKRs are there, right? Before even bring the team in to talk about what an epic is and what the hierarchy is, and then making sure that there is acceptance criteria. So I rolled this out in tranches based on the release planning for each one of the pods or the group of pods that I did. And that is how I achieved that change. It was not like an overall, holistic, hey, the whole team brought into a big room. It is using the release planning as a leverage to change how things are being done at the team level.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. And are your sprints 2 weeks long? What's your heartbeat?
2 weeks.
And were there before that, were there teams using 1 or 3 or 4 or?
Yeah, I generally use 2 weeks, but if they wanted to deliver something quickly, they will just make it a 1 week sprint or even, 1.5 week sprint and things like that. Some of them maybe like 3 week sprint, things like that. There was no standard in terms of the sprint.
No ability to get velocity that was meaningful either then.
Yes. nothing was data driven.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So this standard, that is where, thank you, Ron, for, pointing that out. Without those alignment, we couldn't measure anything. And without the same standard naming conventions, without measure, so this is the other one. If we don't know, how they are planning, what is the story point measurement, all of these metrics are useless as well. I mean, people, so that was the other thing. Without rolling the change with respect to release planning and the standards and the alignment, the metrics, there were no metrics. So 3 metrics is what I have rolled out so far. One is the story points committed versus story point completed per sprint, which is the team velocity. And the other one was the story count planned versus story count completed. And the third thing, which is, I know, some of you Agile purists might cringe on this, but I had to do this because we wanted to make sure that the individuals don't lean on other people too much. They have to carry their weight. What is their story point per sprint from an individual perspective, just to see the trend? So the focus has been on predictability. What I want the team, the direction is, hey, you are the one setting how many story points you're going to pull into a sprint. Make sure that you deliver what you pull in. And the second thing is, okay, sprint over sprint, I'm pushing my program managers and scrum masters to see how they can increase the productivity in terms of what they're pulling. So predictability and productivity are the focus, and those are the goals I have set for my team. And that's how I'm measuring my team from a delivery perspective. And then finally, everything is on Alation products, the JIRA, the portfolio module, and the ECBI dashboard. So, as I mentioned, there is Confluence and all that, but most of the team and the requirement stuff is all done in Alation. And this is an example of, standardized ECBI dashboard with these different, we had like 7 frames. That is a minimum for each one of the pods that they have to show from a metrics perspective. So that was standardized as well. And this is the other user feedback. Once an app goes out, we're using some, mobile testing, mobile user feedback, as well as SurveyMonkey, and looking at, Power BI reporting for that as well from a user feedback perspective. So that's what the journey has been so far. Still a long way to go, but has been the big achievement has been, hey, overall from a leadership perspective, there is an idea of what can be done over next few quarters, and leaders thinking in terms of the big picture and not overcommitting and thinking in terms of priority. That was one big achievement. The second thing is drilling it down in terms of the execution or delivery from a team perspective, and standardizing and aligning the teams so that we can make it data-driven. That has been the journey so far. I want to make this into, accelerate this. And, if you guys attended Jay's presentation last month, he was talking about it in terms of high-performance team and high-performance teams. I'm trying to make the team into a high-performance team, and I want to get them to a hyper-performance team, and that is the journey. The other thing that I want to do is to leverage Amazon's OP1 and OP2 from a portfolio management perspective. I'm doing some research on that and see how I can include that to make the portfolio planning and the roadmap planning better. And the wish list is that, we have a certain velocity. Can we leverage, and this goes back to your original question, Ron, what is the difference between IT strategy versus engineering strategy? It's more about platforms and libraries and rapid application development, and how we can get to that, and how we can build the technical debt, as well as the prioritization for that, for rapid application development. That is the vision that I want to move into. So that's basically, the work in progress. And as I mentioned, it's a long way to go, but we have come a long way as well. That's all I have. Any additional questions? Any questions? And these are my contact information.
Yeah, this is Jay. If you have questions, just take it off mute and ask the question, and then we'll wrap up, and I'll try to figure out how to get the deck to everyone and the recording.
I have no questions at this time. I just want to say that was a great presentation. Really, really interesting. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it.
Double thumbs up.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. And I'm going to copy all of Jay's links for my personal use. Those are really great links he has posted there.
Okay,
Well, if there is nothing else at this point, I'm done. Jay, back to you.
All right, well, thank you very much, Gopal. I think it'd be interesting once you get into the Amazon OP1, OP2 to come back again and tell us how that worked and then what didn't work, right? So that'll be cool. So thank you everyone for joining. So I think for some period of time, this is going to be our life, this virtual existence. So the next one we're going to have in April, we're going to talk about product and product fit and everything. And that's going to be virtual too. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to do Zoom and go through that process as we did today. I'll try to figure out, where to put this stuff. Generally, I've been putting the decks out there in slideware and SlideShare and then sending links, but the recording, that's something different. So I'll figure that out, and then I'll send everyone an email and, access to it. And then I'll also think about doing a virtual one next, and working from home. I think there's a lot of people doing that today, but no reason why we couldn't, and share our experiences of how we do these, especially how we do Scrum events virtually, how to do planning virtually. So PI planning. I mean, that's a pain in the butt to do virtually, but a lot of people do it, so we can maybe talk about that. So any questions from anyone before we adjourn? It's 8:01. Okay, so we're going to adjourn. Thank you again so much, Gopal. That was fantastic. And we'll see everyone again in April, if not sooner. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Thank you
so much.
Jay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Gopal.